Don't follow the old woman. That was the last thing his own man told him, so of course he followed her. Du Kangmin had put 9 men in the ground with a nod of his head, and not one of them had ever made his hands go cold the way they did tonight. Sitting alone in a parked car in the rain, watching a 64-year-old cleaning woman he had employed for 6 years walk into a part of the city he owned, but had never once set foot in. He did not know her first name. He had signed her wages 300 times and never learned it. She had keys to every room in his house. The blueprints of his empire had walked out of a locked study 4 nights ago, and every man he trusted swore the only person who could move through all of it unseen was the woman now fumbling a ring of brass keys at a basement door below the street. She glanced over her shoulder. Not at him, she went down into the dark, and Kangmin, who had spent his whole life making sure no one ever stood behind him, was about to learn that the person he had looked straight through for 6 years had been standing behind him the entire time, and had never once let it show. What waited behind that door would take everything he thought he knew about loyalty and break it in half. Before we go down those stairs with him, tell me where you're listening from tonight. Drop your city in the comments. I like knowing who's in the room now. Let's find out what the old woman was hiding. 6 days before the rain, before any of it, Baek Chunja knelt on the marble outside the second-floor study and wiped a brass doorplate that was already clean. She had been cleaning the Do house for 6 years, and in that time she had learned that a house this size has a language. If you are the kind of person no one thinks to stop talking in front of, the specific complaint of the west stairwell that no one but her ever used, the way the imported espresso machine downstairs sighed twice before it poured, the particular grey dust, the 12 pairs of very expensive shoes left on the floor after the men met behind the study door and decided who would still be breathing by Friday. She knew all of it. She was paid to make all of it disappear by morning, and she did, and no one ever said her name while she did it. That suited her. A woman who cleans a door plate every day, whether or not it needs it, is a woman who has learned that the safest place to stand in a dangerous house is exactly where no one bothers to look. She rubbed the brass, then she rubbed it a second time. The same plate, twice always, a small, pointless circle of the cloth she never explained to anyone and no one ever asked about. This was the door her son had held open, the last time she saw him whole. She did not think about that. She folded the cloth. She stood, one hand pressing her lower back, and moved on down the hall, the ring of keys at her hip giving its small servant's jangle with every step, the sound of a woman going where a woman like her is allowed to go. In this house it meant nobody. In 6 years no one had heard that sound and turned around. That was about to matter more than anything else in the building. Downstairs in the room with the long black table, Du Kangmin was being told that someone had betrayed him, and he was not raising his voice. Because men who need you to believe them raise their voices, and men to whom things simply happen do not. The plans for the Incheon handoff, routes, times, the names of 3 men who thought they were invisible, had left the locked study on the 2nd floor sometime in the last 4 days, and surfaced in the hands of a rival who should never have had them. 9 men stood around the table. Kangmin sat. He turned his heavy signet ring once around his finger, and the room waited on the small silver sound of it, the way sailors watch weather. The study locks from inside, Yoon Sang-ho said, and took off his rimless glasses, and cleaned them with a small grey cloth. 4 people have a key. 3 of them were with you in Busan that week. He set the glasses back on his nose, which leaves the one who is always in the room, and whom none of us ever counts. He did not say her name. He didn't have to. Everyone in the house knew the only person who moved through every locked door with a full ring of keys and a face nobody remembered. Kangmin looked at the table for a long moment. "Bring me what you have," he said. "Not arrest her, not end her. Just bring me what you have." It was the mildest thing a man could say, and every guard in the room felt the temperature drop, because they had learned that Kangmin was most dangerous in the seconds when he seemed to be doing nothing at all. One of them, without being told, took a step back from the door. They gave him what they had, and it was good work. It was too good. Over the next 2 days, Sang-ho laid it out the way a careful man lays out a case. Not shouting she did it, but building a floor under the idea, one quiet plank at a time. The old woman took the west stairwell every day, never the service elevator. An odd habit for a woman with bad knees, wasn't it? Unless she wanted to be somewhere the cameras didn't reach. Sang-ho himself had had the West Wing cameras serviced last month. He kept everything running. He was that kind of man. And yet the footage from the night the plans walked was unluckily corrupted. She had access to the study to clean it. She was in the house at hours no one else was. And here, Sang-ho slid a phone across the table, a cheap burner, dead. Here was what a guard had found tucked at the bottom of her cleaning cart, under the rags behind the bottles. Kang-min looked at the phone. He did not touch it. He was a man who had survived to 40 by noticing when a story was too clean, the way you notice a floor that has been mopped in a house where no one mops. Everything Sang-ho said fit. That was the problem. Truth, in Kang-min's experience, almost never fit. Truth had loose ends, contradictions, a witness who remembered it wrong. This had none. This had the seamless finish of something arranged. Still, the plans had walked. Someone had carried them. And the woman with all the keys had a face he could not even picture with his eyes closed, which meant either she was nothing, or she was the most invisible person he had ever failed to look at. "I want to see her," he said. Sang-ho reached for his glasses. "I'll have her brought." "No," Kang-min stood. "Not brought. I'll see her myself, where she goes when she's done here." He pulled on his coat. "Tonight." Sang-ho's hand paused, half to his glasses, for exactly 1 second. Then he smiled and cleaned them, and said that, of course, that was wise, that was very wise. That evening, Kang-min sat in a parked car in the rain and watched Baek Chunja leave his house by the servant's gate, walk to a bus he did not know ran, ride it into a district he owned on paper and had never entered, and fumble a ring of brass keys at a basement door below the street. He had come to catch a traitor. He did not yet know he had come to be caught. Here is what Kang-min did not know. Sitting in his car, the old woman had known about the leak longer than he had. Not because she was clever in the way men respect, because she emptied the bins. A week before the plans walked, cleaning the underboss's office at the hour when the building believed itself empty, Baek Chunja had found a phone charger in the back of a drawer. The small square kind that fits a cheap phone, not the sleek one Yoon Sang-ho wore his life on. A charger with no phone. She had thought nothing much of it. A woman who cleans learns not to think much of things. Thinking is not what she is paid for. But she was the kind of person who remembers objects the way other people remember faces, because objects were the only company that never looked through her, and a charger for a phone a man was not supposed to own is the sort of thing that sits in the back of the mind and hums. Then the house went to war over a leak, and a cheap dead burner turned up in her cart. A cart she packed herself every morning the same way, rags folded left, bottles racked right, because 6 years of doing a thing at 4A teaches your hands an order that a stranger's hands cannot fake. She had not put that phone there. Someone with a key to the supply room had. And she knew. The way you know a floor has been walked on. The way you know a door has been opened in the night. Exactly whose small square charger was missing its phone. She said nothing. She was very good at saying nothing, because the day she opened her mouth, she lost the job. And the job was the only thing standing between her son and the end of the money. Sang-ho was a careful man, and careful men do not leave a woman standing who has emptied their bins. He did not know how much she knew. He only knew she was the kind of loose end a wise man ties off early. So the day before Kang-min's reign, he arranged an accident, and he arranged it in the one place he was sure no one who mattered ever went. The west stairwell. It happened fast, and it happened without a single witness, which was the whole point. She was carrying a mop bucket down at the end of her shift when the stairwell lights died all at once. Not flickered, died, the way lights die when a hand finds the breaker, and in the black she heard the fire door 2 flights up open, and heavy shoes come down without hurry. A younger woman might have run. Running is loud, and it is how they find you. Chunja did not run. She had swabbed these stairs 3,000 times in the dark to save the building electricity no one thanked her for, and her feet knew every riser like a rosary. She knew the 3rd step from the landing was worn low on the left, that the handrail bracket at floor 2 came loose in November, and was never fixed because she was the only one who used it, that behind the maintenance panel at the half landing was a chained fire exit she had reported 4 times into a silence. She set the bucket down. She did not breathe. She went sideways, not down through a door a stranger would never find in the dark, into the low-service corridor that ran behind the elevator shaft. A corridor that existed on no tour, that appeared on no map the men carried, that was hers the way the whole invisible skeleton of the building was hers. And she came out 3 minutes later 2 wings away, in the light, an old woman with a wet coat and a heart going like a bird's. She had survived by being exactly what they despised her for being, and it did her no good at all. Because when she told a guard, breathless, that the lights had been cut and someone had come down the stairs after her, he looked at her the way you look at an old woman who has lost the plot. The cameras showed nothing. They said the West Wing footage was corrupted again. Poor luck. There was no one on the stairs. "Ma'am, you're tired, go home." Sang-ho passing was all gentle concern. The poor thing at her age on those stairs in the dark, she really shouldn't. He cleaned his glasses. He suggested kindly that perhaps she was not well. She had proven she was being hunted. And by surviving it cleanly, in the dark with no blood and no witness and no footage, she had also proven, to every man in the house, that she was exactly the kind of confused old woman a careful man could point at and call a traitor. The violence had not been meant to kill her. It had been meant to discredit her. It worked perfectly. That night, before the rain, before the car, Chunja did one small thing. She went back to the long room with the black table, and on the underboss's shelf she moved a single object. A heavy glass award, turned a quarter turn, so its engraved face pointed at the door instead of the window. A thing only the person who dusted it every day would ever notice had moved. A thing that said, to exactly one man, "I know it was you, and I am not as blind as you need me to be." Sang-ho noticed. Of course he noticed. He was a careful man. And Kangmin, who happened to be in the room, watching the old woman he'd been told to suspect, saw Sang-ho go very still in front of a turned glass award for no reason a sane man could name, and felt, for the first time, the floor of the clean story shift, 1/2 inch under his feet. So we come back to the rain, and the car, and the brass keys at the basement door. Kangmin followed her down on foot, and following was a thing his body did not know how to do. He had spent 30 years being the man other men followed, the man who entered rooms already arranged for his entering, and now he moved through the wet dark like an amateur, too big for it, his expensive coat wrong against the peeling walls, learning at 40 what the old woman had known at 60, that there is a whole city that belongs to the people no one watches, back routes and service doors and stairwells that don't exist on the map, and that she moved through it the way she moved through his house, unseen, unhurried, home. He stopped outside the basement door she'd unlocked. It stood open a hand's width, warm light, the smell of boiled rice and something medical under it, antiseptic and old. A radio playing, low, an old song, a few worn notes he could not place, and yet absurdly half knew, the way you half know a tune from a life you didn't live. He pushed the door. There was a narrow bed against the far wall, and in the bed there was a young man. He was 29, and he looked 40, thinned by years of lying still, a scar silvering his hairline, his hands open and empty on a hospital blanket, his eyes closed and going nowhere. A feeding line, a machine that breathed the room's silence in a slow, patient rhythm. On the wall above him, taped where he could not see it, a photograph. A young man in a driver's cap, grinning alive, standing beside a black car Kangmin had ridden in 1,000 times. And Kangmin knew the face. He knew it because he had been told 6 years ago that this face was dead. Baek Ji-hoon, his driver. The boy who, on the night of the Gangbayon ambush, the night that made Kangmin what he was, the night everyone in the organization still spoke of in the hush of a founding legend, had put a car between the boss and 11 guns, and taken the crash that should have killed the man in the back seat and been carried off by Kangmin's own men into a story that ended with the words, "He didn't make it, sir. He had made it. He had made it into this bed, into 6 years of this room, into the care of a mother who could not afford it. And no one had ever told the boss, because a dead hero costs nothing, and a living broken one costs 1,800,000 won a month, and the awkward, unbearable weight of a debt that cannot be paid. Chunja stood between the boss and the bed. She had wiped the boiled rice from the corner of her son's slack mouth 1,000 nights, and she did it now, without hurry, without looking at the most powerful man in the city, standing in her doorway with the rain coming off his coat, and when she finally spoke, her voice was not afraid. "You weren't supposed to come here," she said. "I kept it clean so you'd never have to." Kangmin did not pronounce a sentence. He did not turn a ring. For the first and only time in this story, the man who never asked because things simply happened to him, asked. He crossed the small room, and he lowered himself down, slowly, until he was kneeling on the cold cement floor, beside the bed of a man he'd buried in his mind 6 years ago, at eye level with the closed eyes, and everything that made him the most dangerous man in the city drained out of his voice until there was nothing left in it but a person. "Why," he said, just that, then worse. "Why didn't you tell me he was alive?" And Chunja, who had cleaned his floors for 6 years, who had polished the doorplate of the door her son held open, who had rubbed that brass twice every single morning and never once let her face do anything at all, looked at the man kneeling on her floor and told him the truth she had carried under her apron the whole time. "Because you'd have paid," she said. "You'd have sent money and doctors and men to stand outside, and you'd have felt better. And I didn't want you to feel better." Her hands were folded. Her voice did not rise. It was the voice of a woman who had rehearsed nothing because she had never expected to be heard. "I wanted to understand what my son died for. So I came to your house and I cleaned it, and I watched you for 6 years, the great man he thought was worth his life, and I waited to find one thing in you that was worth it." She looked at Ji-hoon. "I'm still waiting." The machine breathed. The radio played its worn few notes, and Kangmin, kneeling, finally placed the tune. It was the song the driver used to hum, low in the front seat on long drives, a habit the boss had found annoying and never once mentioned and had forgotten he remembered until this exact second, in this basement on his knees. He put his hand over his mouth. He did not make a sound. He knelt there a long time. Then he asked the second question, and this one had teeth. "The plans that walked from my study," he said, still low. "You know who took them." It was not a question about her guilt anymore. He had stopped believing that the moment he pushed the door. It was a question about hers knowledge, and they both heard the difference. "I know," she said. "Then why?" said Kangmin, and here his voice found its floor again, an inch of the old iron coming back. "Did you let them put it on you?" Chunja tucked the blanket to her son's chest. "Because the day I say the name," she said, "I lose the job. And the day I lose the job," she nodded, once at the bed, at the machine, at the invoice she could not pay without a boss's wages, "so does he." Yoon Sang-ho did not need the old woman dead anymore. He needed her named by the boss's own mouth. 'Cause a traitor executed on the boss's word is a chapter closed, and a chapter closed is a leak no one keeps looking for. That was always the plan, not to kill her, to make Kangmin kill her, and in doing so, seal Sang-ho's own crime under the boss's signature forever. So when Kangmin returned to the house before dawn, wet and silent, Sang-ho was ready, and he had done the wise thing careful men do. He had gathered the room, all 9. He wanted witnesses to the boss ending the traitor so that no one could ever reopen it. He laid it out one final time, immaculate, the stairwell habit, the corrupted cameras he had so diligently serviced, the burner in her cart, and now, most damning, the Turned Award, the way she'd been sneaking around his office, the erratic story of an attack no camera saw, a confused, dangerous old woman with keys to everything. "Give the word," Sang-ho said gently, cleaning his glasses, "and it's finished." And Baek Chunja stood in the doorway of the long room, small, grey, unbelieved, with the ring of brass keys at her hip, and understood that she had reached the last door and that this one only opened one way. She could stay silent, keep the job, keep the money. Let them call her a traitor and send her home and go on wiping her son's mouth in the dark for whatever years the money bought. Or she could say the name and lose all of it. Kangmin let the silence run until even Sang-ho's certainty began to sweat in it. Then he did the thing no one in that room had ever seen him do. He looked at the cleaning woman, directly, by name. "Baek Chunja," he said, and half the men in the room startled because they had not known she had a name, had never once heard the boss use it, and the sound of it in his mouth landed like a gavel. Tell them what you told me. She did not tell them about her son. That was hers, and she kept it. She told them what a cleaner knows. She told them there was a charger in the back of the underboss's second drawer for a phone he was not supposed to own, and that if they opened the drawer now, they would find it still there, because a man who plants a burner in a cart forgets that the woman who packs the cart also dusts the drawer. She told them the West Wing cameras were not corrupted on the night the plans walked. They were off and only off in the exact wing the underboss had serviced, because he had not failed to keep them running. He had chosen which eyes went dark, the same way he'd chosen the west stairwell for a woman he thought no one would miss. She told them the study locked from inside. Yes. But the vent behind the bookcase she cleaned every Thursday did not lock at all, and a thin man could reach a locked room through it. And a man had, because she had found the dust disturbed and wiped it clean and said nothing, because saying things was not what she was paid for. And she told them that the glass award on his shelf faced the door now instead of the window, because she had turned it to see if a guilty man would notice, and he had gone white in front of it, in front of the boss, for no reason an innocent man could ever explain. One thread, then another, each one a thing only the invisible woman could have known, because each one lived in the places men with power never look. The backs of drawers, the vents, the dark stairs, the turned face of an object on a shelf. By the fourth thread, no one was looking through her anymore. Sang-ho reached for his glasses to clean them. "Don't," said Kang-min very quietly, and Sang-ho's hand stopped in the air, and every man in the room understood at once what the boss had understood a beat before. That the careful little habit they'd all watched 100 times was the tell of a man buying himself a second to build the next lie. And that he was doing it now, in front of them, with his hand halfway to his face. The room had rearranged itself. It does that fast in that world. Power is only ever the reading of a room, and the room had just reread. Kang-min stood. He did not raise his voice. He did not say what would happen to Yoon Sang-ho, because a man who spells out the punishment frames the fear, and a man who leaves it blank lets every listening mind fill the dark with something worse. He said only, "He came into my house through a vent. Take him out the same way he'd have taken her." 6 words of instruction and a whole sentence of nothing, and 2 guards who had, an hour ago, believed the old woman a traitor now moved to the underboss's shoulders without being told twice. Sang-ho did not shout. Careful men rarely do. He reached, one last time out of pure reflex for his glasses, and found no hand free to clean them. That was the last anyone in that room ever spoke of him. It should have ended there the way these stories are supposed to. The traitor gone, the old woman vindicated, the boss grateful. But Chunja had told him the truth in the basement, and the truth was that she did not want him to feel better. So when Kang-min came to her after, and offered her everything, the best clinic in the country for her son, specialists flown in, the invoice paid forever, a house, money, men outside the door, the whole weight of an empire tipped toward her boy. She listened to all of it, and then she shook her head. "That's not the debt," she said. He didn't understand. He was a man who had only ever known one language for owing, and it was the language of paying, and he had just offered to pay everything. "You can't buy back what he gave," she said, not unkindly, the way you explain a thing to someone who has genuinely never learned it. "He didn't lend it to you. There's no getting even. There's only," and she stopped, because there was no clean word for it, and she was not a woman who reached for words she didn't have. Kang-min stood in the basement a long time. The machine breathed. The radio was off now. Then he did the thing that mattered, and it was very small, and no one saw it, and there was no music. He knelt down again beside the bed, and he took the corner of the blanket that had slipped from the young man's shoulder in the night. The small daily task, the unpayable, ungrand, unnewsworthy task of a person tending another person, and he tucked it back carefully, the way a mother does, the way he had watched her do, and he stayed there a while on the cement floor beside the man who had given him 30 more years of life, and he said nothing, because there was nothing to say that was worth as much as the tucking of the blanket. Chunja watched him from the doorway. It was not forgiveness. She would not have insulted her son with something so cheap. But it was the first thing in 6 years she had found in him that might have been worth it. Baek Chunja did not stay in the do house. She could have. He asked her to, not as a servant now, but he asked in the awkward way of a man who has just learned that some people cannot be kept by being paid. She said no. She could clean any house in the city, and she would, but she could not go on cleaning the doorplate of the door her son held open twice every morning in the house of the man he'd died for. Being seen, it turned out, was the thing that finally let her stop. On her last morning, she walked to the head of the long black table and she set the ring of brass keys down on the wood in front of Du Kangmin, every key to every locked room, the whole invisible skeleton of his world laid down without a sound where for 6 years it had jangled at her hip. Then she left. And the thing Kangmin noticed, the thing he would go on noticing for the rest of his life, in every room she'd ever cleaned, was not the keys on the table. It was the silence where the jangling used to be. He had spent his whole life making sure no one stood behind him. He never heard her leave. That was the whole point. She had always been the one person in the world he could not hear coming. And he had spent 6 years calling that nothing, when all along it had been the only loyalty in the building that asked for nothing back. He kept the keys, he never used them. Some doors you leave to the person who earned them. If you made it all the way down to this basement with me, thank you for sitting in the dark this long. 2 things before you go. First, tell me the city you're listening from tonight. I mean it. I read them, and I like knowing where in the world someone's up late with this story. Drop it below. And second, for the ones who felt this one land, if you think Kangmin actually earned it in the end, type "I'm still waiting" in the comments. If you don't think he ever could, type it anyway. Let's see where the room lands. Next time, we stay in this world, but we follow a different door. A translator no one thought was listening, in a room full of men who assumed she couldn't understand a word. You won't guess what she heard. Stay warm. I'll see you in the next one.